everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Elevate with C&M Coaching. My name's Maggie. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Today, we're going to talk about something I think is super important when it comes to sales calls, collections calls, service calls, managerial calls, and that is de-escalating or objection handling. Now, technically, they're two different things, but for the purposes of this podcast, I'm going to give you the same advice for both, and it is going to kind of depend on what your objection is as to how you handle it and what you say. But the techniques that I'm going to teach you are still going to be valid in a de-escalation scenario or an objection scenario like best price, things along those lines. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what do we do when we have a customer that calls in and they're super frustrated or angry and we can't get them to calm down? So here at C&M Coaching, you can actually purchase de-escalation training from us. It is something that we do teach. And because of that, I'm not going to go super in depth today because I still want to be able to keep some secrets for our customers who have paid for this service and those down the road that may want to as well. But I want to give you some basic broad tips that can help you in different situations that you may find yourself in. So one of the things that happens is the customer calls up and they're angry about something or they're frustrated. Whatever it is, they're taking it out on you because you've answered the phone. Maybe they've been transferred to you. Maybe you're the manager and it's your job to figure out how to handle this scenario. The first thing that you want to do is let the customer talk. Do not interrupt them. You may feel the urge to do so, just like we all do when we're getting into an altercation or an argument, but you don't want to do that. The last thing that you want to do is put fuel on the fire. And that's what's going to happen if you interrupt your customer. So instead of doing it that way, let them finish talking. Now, the one exception to this rule would be if they are swearing at you or getting personal or taking things in a more belligerent manner, then you're going to have to interrupt them and try to stop them. And I usually follow a 3 strikes you're out rule. So the first time they do it, I'll say, look, Mrs. Smith, I understand that you're frustrated and upset. I'm going to do everything I can to help you. However, I have to ask you, please do not swear at me. That's not going to help the situation. Then if they do it again, say, Mrs. Smith, I've already asked you once to please not swear at me. If it happens again, I am going to have to disconnect this call. And then if it happens a third time, Mrs. Smith, I've asked you twice to please not speak to me this way. I'm going to have a manager contact you. Thank you. Have a nice day. And you hang up. Before you hang up, I do encourage you to write down whatever number it is that you see on that caller ID so that you can grab that phone call from your call log. Hopefully you're recording your phone calls, and if not, we need to have a different discussion. But grab that phone number so that you can give it to your manager so that they can listen to the call before they call the customer. And managers, listen to the call before you call the customers. I can't stress that enough. You don't want a he said, she said. You want the facts, right? So make sure you listen to that phone call. But follow that 3 strikes you're out rule and then do not interrupt your customers. So that's very important. If you start interrupting them, you're not going to like where the conversation goes and you're only going to make things worse. Now, the second tip that I have for you is that you're going to want to repeat whatever the customer has explained as their situation or whatever they're frustrated about back to them. Now, of course, this does assume that they're using appropriate professional language, but either way, you can turn it around and make it so that they understand that you've heard them. This is one of the most important parts of de-escalating any scenario because your customer feels frustrated and anger, and they want you to feel as angry and frustrated as they are. And that is why they are attacking you in this way or saying the things that they're saying. Because to them, you don't understand what they're going through. There's no possible way you could understand what they're going through. Now, we all know that's just not the case. And we've all been through difficult and frustrating situations before. But your customer isn't thinking clearly. They want you to hurt the way that they're hurting. So make sure that you understand their frustration and use that verbiage back at the customer. For example, Mrs. Smith, I really understand how frustrating it can be when you go outside to start your car and it's not starting. I apologize that this has been a reoccurring issue. Let me get some information from you so that we can work together to get this situation resolved for you. And that might mean that you have to get a tow truck out there and go a little bit above and beyond for the customer. But that's your ultimate goal, is to try to repeat the issue back to them, tell them, I hear you, I understand what you're saying. Now let me see how I can help. And then from there, turning the situation around. On the back of that, it's also very important that you do not take this personally. even if they are personally attacking you as an individual. Do not take it personal. Now, I know how hard that is. I worked in mental health and I dealt with patients that were struggling and suffering from different mental illnesses. And sometimes they would take it out on you very seriously and very personally, and they would say things to attack you or threaten you. And it was very difficult for me to separate myself from what it was that they were saying. So I do know firsthand what that is like. And I do know firsthand how difficult it can be for you to go, all right, they're not actually meaning anything they're saying right now, especially if they're being threatening. On the other side of that, though, you shouldn't take being threatened. Don't allow a customer to threaten you and follow the three strikes you're out rule if you get into a sticky situation and you cannot get yourself out. So repeating things back to the customer is important. Try to find the issue in their sentence or in their complaint, pluck it out, and then from there, do the best you can to repeat it back to the customer and then start to gather your details. Now, there are going to be situations where even though they're frustrated about something, you can't help them or you can't fix it. Be careful to not make promises to the customer that you cannot keep. Don't say things like, I will get this fixed for you, or I can solve this for you. Now, if it is something where you're pretty sure you can handle it, then you can say, let me see what I can do to help. Otherwise, it's let me gather some information from you and we'll take it from there. Or let me gather some information from you and I'll get all the facts together and get you an answer, because it's not necessarily going to be a solution and it may not be something that they like. Now, once you get all the facts together, now you have to determine how to give the information to the customer. One of the most important things to keep in mind is that you always want to set a clear expectation with that person. Meaning, if you can't help them, what is their next steps? What are they supposed to do about whatever it is that's going on? If it's a situation where they need to make their payment and they just haven't and the vehicle is at risk of repossession, walk them through what they need to do. Give them dates, give them dollar amounts, and make sure that at the end you ask, do you have any questions and are you clear? Maybe even get them to write down the details. Anything that you can do to make sure it's clear and it's very cut in stone and the customer completely understands what's going on is what you're shooting for here. It's also important that if someone's going to be calling the customer back, that you pay attention to that. What happens? Remember, you're making the promise. If you say, I'm going to have my manager give you a call back, it might not be till tomorrow, but they will call you. Your job is to make sure that somebody calls that customer back and maybe even follow up with them. Don't just write it off and send the message or stick it on a post-it note and expect your manager to follow through. We all know that things can happen. There's a lot of moving pieces at a dealership. So make sure that you follow up and make sure that it was handled. And then the other piece of advice that I have is you got to make sure that you don't take these scenarios out on the next person, because it's really easy for us to let that one bad call ruin the rest of our day. And then you take it out on the next customer that calls, and you cannot do that. If you have to take 10 deep breaths, do it. Make sure you take good notes. I see a lot of situations where we can have a crazy phone call come into your call tracking and log into the CRM and there's no notes about what happened. Don't do that to the next person that speaks to this customer. Take notes. Make sure you document any information that can help build a case for you if one is necessary at some point down the road. Now, when it comes to handling objections, I'm talking like simple stuff. You can use these exact same processes. Like, let's say the customer's really pushing you for a down payment amount, or maybe it's an approval. I really want to know if I'm approved. Okay, Mrs. Smith, I completely understand that being approved before you come in is very important to you. However, I do want to make sure that you know what's important to us, and that is going to be protecting your identity. Therefore, we don't do any approvals over the phone. We want you to come into the store, we want to see your face, and we want to see your driver's license and make sure that you're the same person. This is something that we've implemented to protect every customer that wants to purchase from us. We hold ourselves to a high standard. So what you're doing here is you're taking what your customer has said, you're using the answer to her question to flip it around and giving her actual facts, but also setting a precedent, explaining to the customer what's going to happen next. Like, this is how I can get you the answer. This is what I can do for you, but this is what you got to do for me in order for this to work. And that is really important to be clear with your customers. You don't want things to be fuzzy and gray. Yep, just send in your application and we'll go from there. What's that mean? Is somebody going to call me? Anytime you're doing an application, you want that customer in front of you. Yes, of course, you want to protect their identity, but there's other reasons that we want to do it too. We don't want to be used just to approve a customer so they can go buy from our competitor. But anytime you're dealing with an objection, use that same technique. You can also sometimes handle an objection by answering the question with a question. Hey, what's the mileage on this vehicle? Hey, that's a great question. Did you have a mileage range in mind? And then from here, you can answer the customer's question appropriately. Well, we have a wide variety of vehicles available. I'm pretty sure we're going to have something that matches the mileage requirements you've set for yourself. Why don't you come on in and take a look at what we have? Or, hey, great news, that vehicle matches within your mileage range. We're open till 7. Can you come in right now, or is a little bit later today better for you? And again, you're just thinking about how can I answer this question without giving away the whole kit and caboodle, and really focus on bringing the customer into the store or handling the situation or the scenario. And you're not going to be able to help everybody all the time. We see a lot of scenarios where there's a situation that has escalated just too far. In fact, I did play an example of one of those phone calls a couple of years ago at the compliance conference. A customer had called up because their truck had been shut off, and they were so belligerent and just screaming at the collector, turn my car back on, turn my truck back on. You know who I am. I'm not going to verify my identity. It was crazy. And she was so calm and she handled that situation like a pro. And she told him, there's nothing I can do. You didn't make your payment. We had multiple conversations, and she did have to go back through the dates that they spoke, the amounts he promised he was going to pay, and the fact that he hadn't paid anything. However, she did end the call with a solution. If you can come up with, and it was like $1,500 or $2,000 or something, by the end of the day today, we can turn your vehicle back on. Now, he had had the beeping for a few days, so he knew it was going to get turned off. They'd already given him a code once. They'd followed all the state laws and rules, and they were, compliant in that aspect of things. But he refused to work with her and was just swearing at her. And finally, she said, "Sir, I don't think there's anything that I can do to assist you. You don't want to be assisted. I do apologize that you are experiencing this right now. If you would like to take a look through your finances and see what you can do to come up with this cash, or maybe call a friend or a family member for help, I'd be happy to work through that with you. But at this time, we're just going around in circles and we're not making any progress here with this call." And that was the best that she could do in that situation. There's always going to be times where that is the way that it goes, and there's nothing more that you can do. But what matters is that you stay calm. Don't ever ask the customer to calm down. Like you can say, speaking to me this way isn't productive, but you don't want to say calm down. And if you're married and to a woman, you know why. Don't say calm down. It's just nobody wants to hear calm down, period. And it doesn't help the situation. That's why instead of saying, I need you to calm down, we stop and we listen to what it is that they're upset about, and then we say, I understand that you're upset about, or I understand and I sincerely apologize that you're experiencing XYZ. And remember to use your voice inflection. You don't want to sound like, I'm sorry that this is what you're going through right now, but there's nothing I can do to help you. That would be horrible. You don't want to say it like that. I understand. I'm sorry that this is what you're going through right now. At this time, there is nothing more that I can do to assist you unless XYZ happens. And you're changing your vocal tone. Pay attention to how you sound, because sometimes, like, how they say your face sometimes says things that your mouth hasn't. Well, your vocal tone says things that your words haven't. And so pay attention to your voice inflection and how you sound, and don't have an attitude when you're trying to help these people, because that will make things worse. I know that everything that I'm saying is not easy, and it does take practice, but I do encourage you, if you have a difficult situation or a difficult phone call like this, and it has been recorded, I encourage you to get access to that recording and listen back through it and critique yourself. See if you can find scenarios or situations where you could have said or done something a little bit differently to overall improve the quality of the call or make the outcome different. Thank you so much again for joining us on this episode of Elevate with C&M Coaching, and I'll see you real soon.